Hey guys, this is Rhys Trenhaile from the Vanguard Team at Manor Realty. Here's a headline for you. The house price supercycle is just getting going. Let's say that again. The house price super cycle is just getting going. And before you think this is coming from a sensationalist news source, this is the Economist magazine, which is sort of the right of center fiscally conservative publication in the world. And it's quite accurate when it comes to these things. And I love it because of the global perspective of it. I've always been talking about supply and demand being the 800-pound gorilla behind housing prices going up. The Economist agrees with me, but the Economist is more sophisticated than me, right? So they break it down into supply and demand, basically into three different things, right? They talk about demography, urban economics, and infrastructure, and how it's a perfect storm of the three. So let me quickly explain without getting too deep. When you're talking about the demography, however you like to pronounce it, they're okay both ways. Check the dictionary. But when you talk about demography, you're talking about in the Western world an aging population of baby boomers with not enough domestic workers born and raised in our respective countries to support it all. So you have to bring in more workers, which means international immigration to your countries, whether it's Canada, United States, Germany, etc. We've always had pretty healthy immigration, but I remember when Jean Chrétien back in the late 1990s was increasing immigration to new record levels of like 160, 170,000 immigrants a year, right? And we've seen more modern federal governments bringing in upwards of 500,000 to 1 million a year, right? And again, it's necessary. You might not like it, but it's necessary because countries in a capitalistic society do not grow without population growth. It is the big sort of Achilles heel to the whole system, is you have to have continued population growth in order for the system to work. Well, we're not having enough babies anymore, right? So now we're relying on other countries to create enough human beings to further support our countries. So that's the demographic sort of issue that is creating supply and demand, because you have to bring in immigrants. Immigrants need a place to live, and that pushes up supply and demand on your housing stock. All right. Well, in the old days, right, 1950s, etc., you need 10 more houses, you build 10 more houses. It's not a big deal. You do it the next day. Well, guess what's happened in the last 70 years? Regulations, right? And it's not just regulations on the actual builders, it's regulations on the developers, it's regulations on like everything. And it slows down everything and it chokes out everything to a point where you can't build fast enough to match demand. And so you end up with the problems you have now, where, if, for example, Windsor is literally adding 31,000 people last year to the city and it's 40,000 this year. So in 2 years, you're adding 70,000 people to a community of about 400,000, right? Like, and we can't build. Like, they're really happy right now. They just were like, yes, we hit the provincial quotas of 1,100 houses this year. And I'm like, I'm not, call me crazy, but I don't think that's enough. Like, we have way more people moving here than we're allowed to build. And so this is the urban economics. Is part of it is that there's now this massive swelling of regulations. But the problem also is that those regulations cater to NIMBYism, which is not in my backyard. So if people live in suburbia, they don't want suburbia to change, even though society is constantly changing. They own the houses. They want it a certain way, or we're not voting for you. Whoa, hey, hold on a sec here. Don't talk crazy. I need your votes. Let's pump the brakes here. Hey, we don't need fourplexes and apartment buildings and all kinds of, we don't need that in your neighborhood. Single family houses. This is the urban economics, right? So you're fighting against regulations that are geared towards especially suburbia, where there's a massive voting base, making sure it doesn't change. Now we're starting to see cracks in that armor, just out of pure necessity. But we saw it in action in Windsor, where the federal government said, "Here's tens of millions of dollars. but everybody's allowed to build a fourplex. And our city said no, right? We said no to tens of millions of dollars that could have gone towards the housing crisis, simply because everybody's allowed to build up to a triplex right now. They didn't want everybody being allowed to build up to a fourplex, which again was one of the few mistakes I think the local government has made in recent times. But I mean, they did it for votes. At the end of the day, there's a lot of pressure from suburbia not to take that money. All right, so that's the urban economics, and then infrastructure. So you've also had a phenomena where during the sort of after World War II, you started building suburbs, right, to handle the population boom, etc. So you ended up with tons of suburban environments. But what you're doing every time you add another acre of suburb, you're taking away another acre of farmland, right? And over time, that becomes super, super damaging to your economy, which is heavily based in agriculture. That's a lot of your economy. So people have pumped the brakes on letting cities continuing to swell. So in Ontario, for example, we have the Green Belt, right? And the Green Belt is meant to stop this continual urban sprawl that eats up all of your, pardon the pun, eats up all of your farmland. So you're forced into smaller areas, and again, that restricts how much you can build and drives up supply and demand. Okay, so those are the three reasons behind supply and demand: is your demographic issues, where you're adding a lot more immigration because you have to. Capitalistic society, you have to have population growth, but those people need a place to live. So that's part of your supply and demand, number one. Number two, urban economics, which is sort of the regulation swell, number one, but the regulation swell also catering to NIMBYism, not in my backyard, right? Number three, infrastructure. Cities and countries don't want to see their cities continue to eat up all the farmland because that creates other crises down the road. So then you see things like the Green Belt policy meant to stop that urban sprawl. So those are your three reasons behind supply and demand. And this is why, and I'm going to come back to this again, guys, whether you're buying a house to live in or whether you're investing, you have to understand that the time is now to invest because of the quote unquote super cycle. And you're going to feel it harder in Windsor than you're going to feel it in a lot of other cities, simply because we're economically exploding. And we have tens of thousands of people moving down here a year. All right, I hope that helps sort of explain why, instead of going, oh, well, Biden sucks or Trudeau sucks or that new guy that's running United Kingdom sucks. It's not about those leaders. It's about these three factors that have built up over the last 70 years in our society. I'm Rhys Trenhaile from the Vanguard team at Manor Realty. Avoid the super cycle. Do it today. Buy today. We're here today. Talk to you soon.